was to have this tour guide done that we've been putting together, and literally is at Office Outfitters right now with the final touches. So otherwise it would have been nice to have them here tonight for you guys. We just couldn't get it done by when we needed it done. So those will actually be available downtown, probably at the library here at the Holly History Center. The guide the pictures you're seeing are a part of this guide. And I think, as far as I know, it's probably the most intensive to date of the architecture that we have in Waupaca. I guess we can get started. First house, and one of the neatest things and one of the funnest things about doing this is that we tried to find the oldest pictures possible of these homes. So if anything all of them are in black and white. Are they all in black and white? Okay. The ones that are in black and white, some of them are older pictures, some are actually original pictures, and we might be able to remember. If people want to know what the dates are, we can definitely throw those at you too, because I have them in front of me. This is my little cheat sheet right here. So let's get things started. This house is known as the Frank Stratton Home. It's on Lake Street, 406 East Lake Street. This would be a Tudor Revival style. It's an excellent. Both these neighboring houses are excellent homes. Oh, you do have the date in the corner there. Thank you, Ashley. Are excellent examples of the Tudor Revival style. This home was built in 1914, interestingly, by a guy named Peter Hanson, who was a mason at the late 19th century, early 20th century. Can everybody hear me now?
No. Could you please repeat the name of the home again?
Yep, the home is the Frank Stratton Home, and it was built in 1914. It's a Tudor Revival. I'll try to speak out at the crowd. Maybe that'll help too. Yeah, speak to the last group. Okay, sounds good. One interesting story is about this home is a guy named Peter Hanson built this home, and the home that's following this picture also 1 year right after the other. This was 1914, and then on the next slide, if Ashley wants to just zip to it, this is the second house he built, and this was actually his home for a while too. And both homes are a beautiful example of Tudor Revival style, but interestingly, he kind of used a little different format with each home. The first home, you'll see the exposed beams, which is a Tudor. That's kind of one of the classic styles of the Tudor. The curved entry is definitely a Tudor Revival style feature, as well as the very steeply pitched roofs. Same thing that you see here. Probably one of the neat, unusual features of this home is that it has an attached garage. For 1915 was very unusual. You just don't see that a lot. One of the other interesting things too, and you could tell that garage doors were pretty new, the style that's on this, and that's why I included in the picture when I shot it, is it's the type of garage door that actually opens out as it goes up, which you wouldn't ever want to have in winter in Wisconsin, especially like the last snowfall we had. So, but amazingly, it's still there, which is kind of neat too. Questions at all? Otherwise, I can just keep going. Third home is, this is a neat picture. It's known as the C.R. Hoffman Home. It's a Queen Anne style. It was built in 1886. One of the things I like about this home, and I wish I could have the now picture next to it, is it's a beautiful example of a Queen Anne, but when the house started life in 1886, it was a little bit more of a cottage-size home where, and you guys would know because you live right next to this home, the home has been added on to the east side quite a bit, and where we have the gable that's facing to the main street. Now there's like a little mini tower that comes up pierces up through the roof line. I guess that's all we have on that one. This home is known as the J.O. Scott Home. It's a Queen Anne style, a little bit more of a subdued Queen Anne style. Queen Anne we're all used to seeing a lot of the fish scale shingling used a lot, especially up in the peaks of the dormers. This house is using basically all square shingles, so it's almost kind of a hybrid home of the Queen Anne style and the shingle style, which is also of this era. And I tried to do the eras chronologically for you guys too on the sheet, on the handout that you have. Probably one of the neatest stories about this home is that the gentleman that owned this home, I would think it was the 1930s, I have to look forward a little bit here. Probably 1927, 26, because J.O. Scott that built this home, he didn't do this, but the next gentleman that owned this home in the 1920s actually removed this section of the home here, a two-story section, so that his neighbor next door could actually build that home next to him, which is, that's the epitome of friendship, I would say, right there.
Were they cedar shake shingles on there, or not?
I'm guessing yes, but I'm basing that on one single picture and the only reason that we can really corroborate this, because it's a story we've heard many times that this was taken off, and you always want to believe that everything's fact, but you got to kind of do a little more fact finding, especially when you're doing a guide. But in the 1898, is that the semi-centennial? That's the booklet?
Yeah,
that has a picture of this home from the lakeside when the wing was still on there. So it definitely proves that obviously there was a wing at one time. And at press, we didn't have time to do all the corroborating on the evidence, but we're all pretty sure that three doors down, Donna? The 2 doors down, the wing of this home is 2 more doors down, which is, and unfortunately we don't have the picture of that because it's not a part of the architectural guide, but what an interesting story, to say the least. Go ahead, guys.
Can you include what streets they're on? I'm
Yep.
fairly new to them.
Yep. And what we tried to do in the guide too is that when we set it up, we tried to keep everything street specific, so you're not walking here and then you're 2 streets down. So everything that I'm doing right now is Lake Street. And this one, and I'm sorry, I'll also give the addresses too. And the guide, of course, the guide when it finally does come out, which I'm hoping maybe is next week or the week after, that will have all this information too. But yes, this would be the J.O. Scott home, Queen Anne style, built 1890, 206 East Lake Street. Another Tudor Revival style home, kind of a later Tudor Revival style. Like any style, as it migrates into the future, you'll see kind of transitions. And this house is you'd have a little bit harder time saying this is a Tudor Revival style, but still some of the main elements, and you can't see them as well in the peaks and in the dormers, but you still have the beaming, the vertical beaming with the stucco. Still definitely a Tudor Revival feature, but getting more to the 20s and 30s theme. This is the Irving Hanson home, and interesting, also still has the original garage, which I think is neat. As I said, Tudor Revival style, built in 1928. This is 209 East Lake Street, the F.R. Fisher home. It's an American 4-square style, and we call it American. Most people just call it 4-square style, but it's actually kind of one of the first styles developed by Americans, other than copying essentially. So technically, it's an American 4-square style, and was built in 1914. The 4-square style by far is probably one of the most common styles across the whole country, as much as it is in Waupaca. Go ahead, Mike.
Would the metal roof be original, or if not original, would it be the time?
Probably in 1914, most likely it probably would have had cedar shake shingles. Most of these homes would have had cedar shake shingles most of the time originally. Metal you didn't really see a whole lot in town. That seemed to be more, on barns and farm homes. But obviously with the cedar shake shingle, you probably got 20, 30 years out of those, and by then you were, re-roofing once again. Oh, awesome. I can feel my self getting hoarse already. Now can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, there we go. I feel like I got my 6 guns on here.
Start over, okay?
I'm a run-on sentence as it is. You guys everybody should have brought sleeping bags then, maybe. Everybody in the back can hear me now, though? Okay, good, awesome. And if you guys do have elements that you want me to pick out on the homes, I can as far as the styles, but that's kind of why I gave you the style sheet, so you can look and go, okay, there's that feature, there's that feature. Obviously, the Foursquare's biggest feature is it's square, and typically when you would walk into a Foursquare, you have 4 rooms on each level with a central stairway. That's almost universal to almost all Foursquares.
How many people are living in Waupaca?
In 1914, well, I know in 1898, which we also have in the guide too, because there's a lot of informational stuff that I included in the guide, and maybe you can touch on the end, because I think even a lot of Waupacans would be surprised of some of the information that we've put together. 1914, I would say maybe 4,000 people. In 1898, there was 3,500, which was, when you think about Waupaca today, that was a lot of people already. Waupaca was a real dynamic town with the railroad especially, and lots of people were, a lot of these homes, when you look at the dates, so many of them were built so close together, so there was always building going on somewhere in this older district of Waupaca. Somebody or tearing down a home. It's amazing on some of the old pictures that we have, and I'll point out when we come to the picture later, is you'll see pictures in the background of homes that were torn down to build homes that we see as old homes now. So, I guess next slide whenever you're ready, dear. This is 301 East Lake Street, known as the C.A. Spencer Home. It's a Queen Anne style again. You'll hear me saying Queen Anne style a lot because Queen Anne was by far, from the 1870s till about the maybe 1910, was by far the most common style. And Queen Anne covers a lot of ground too, as far as extremely elaborate to not so elaborate.
C.A. Spencer?
Oh, yep, C.A. Spencer Home. It was built in 1885. I think, not to slight Mr. Spencer, he built a beautiful home, but I think one of the neatest features of the C.A. Spencer Home is that it was the Mirror Lake Hospital from 1936 to 1955. And Dr. Salen is here tonight, so he could probably tell stories all day. We could probably talk about this one all day long, but it's interesting to see how even healthcare has changed dramatically. One of the neat anecdotal things that I didn't put in our guide, but living next to this house, interestingly, the power supply box downstairs is marked emergency, surgery, and so forth, and that's kind of a neat feature. That's still kind of a neat holdover from its past histories. Obviously, in 1955, it became a residence rating again. I'm trying to read through these real quick to try to pick out some of the real interesting details. Definitely one of the older homes. I love these drawings that were in, there's a book at the library called Illustrated Waupaca from 1888, and that's where some of these are coming from, and they're exquisite. I think one of the neat things is, sorry Ashley, is you see the names, I'm going over the windows, what do we call those?
Awnings.
Awnings, thank you, very simple word. It's neat to see those, and that's something that's just been kind of lost to time too, because so many homes had awnings back. That was, I guess, your best air conditioning at the time. So, moving on to the next house, which I'm kind of near and dear to. This is a neat old picture. This one is from 1899, I believe. And it's a neat one. It's actually kind of a truncated picture of the Shearer Christie house. I'll make sure I say that too quick. 315 East Lake Street, the Shearer Christie house, and we also put original carriage house, and I almost felt like I should do a disclaimer because my garage that looks like a carriage house isn't the original one, but if you look behind that, that's where the original one is, but I've been way too much on this tour guide to explain. But the interesting thing about this picture is it's actually a corner picture shooting down west on Lake Street and north on State Street, and you can still see, and you can barely see a little bit, you can see the fence of the home. Well, actually there wasn't a home across the street at that time, but you can see it's still a dirt road, and kind of some of the neat features that just kind of harken back a little bit to a little simpler time. And talking about the shingles, you can see on my home originally is a real good example in this old picture of what the shake shingle looked like. Interestingly, when we did the re-roofed the house in 2001 after that horrible storm we had, the cedar shakes were still on the oriel window, or some people call it turret, and also on the tower, so I could still see them 100+ years later. But if you look at that roof, that shows you what most roofs look like in the middle to late 1800s, earlier 1900s, before asphalt shingles came into play, and that kind of, they were cheaper, easier to make, and they lasted longer. The hardest thing with doing this whole guide that we did is trying to cover pertinent things, interesting things, things about the home, things about the people that live there. If I would have made this everything that I wanted to be, it wouldn't be a guide, it would be a book about the thickness of War and Peace. But there's so much neat information about Waupaca. Caleb Shearer was a very interesting guy who actually built 2 very grand homes in Waupaca within about 6 years of each other, which is also kind of interesting. Most people don't do that either, then or now. And I've got a pretty good listing of many of the things that are interesting to this home, and this home could probably be talked about easily for an hour in itself, because if you're looking for a home that exemplifies high Queen Anne Victorian, this house would be the one. And I think when Mr. Shearer built it, that's what he was shooting for, was to be kind of the highest that it could be. And luckily, beautiful. The interesting thing too, I should say about this house, and then I'll move on, because actually you should have a poker over there. But is most people feel this or think this home is the Christie home, and it's neat that it's known that, because that's obviously my last name, but no relation. But Mr. Shearer does definitely need his due. He was the fellow that built the home, but only lived there for about 5 years, and then moved out of Waupaca. And the house actually sat for 9 years for sale until the Christies bought it in 1907. If some of you guys that know Waupaca history, Mr. Christie was a merchant and had a store in just downtown Waupaca, but also in New London. And I want to say it's where the Ace True Value store, the True Value store is, but it's not that anymore. Now, where the antique store is downtown, that was the Christie store for probably 30 to 40 years, Mike, would you say? Yeah, and then it became Gamble's after that. So some of you guys that grew up here and have lived here for a long time might remember. I still run into some people that remember shopping at the Christie store. So
the Christie family still owned the store well into the period when Shearer's had it.
They did.
Shearer's finally bought it.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's a good one. Questions?
What was the style again?
Queen Anne style. This would definitely be, if there was a well, and if you look in your guide and you look at all the things that make a Queen Anne, every single one of them is on this house. He literally didn't leave anything off the list.
Was this an architect?
Oh, and I should touch on that too. That's a good question. Thank you, my dear. One of the things we try to cover in the guide too is a lot about, we always talk about the homes and sometimes the people that built them, spent the money to build them. A lot of times the unsung heroes are like the architects. Most homes in Waupaca were probably designed by local architects or people that just built homes and maybe drew it out on a napkin or something like that. This home, Caleb Shearer, actually, back then, I'll go back a little bit. In the 1880s, 90s, and turn of the century into the 20th century, you could actually buy booklets by mail that were, you'd literally go page through page of blueprint designs. And you'd go, oh, you know what, I like page 92, I want to build that house. And you would contact and this must have been a very slow process back because it had all been done by mail. You would contact the gentleman peddling his blueprints and say, I want to build your house. And of course, you'd pay X amount for that. In this case, Caleb Shearer hired a guy named George Guernsey, who's out of Chicago, so not that far away. As I understand it, he had Mr. Guernsey actually visit Waupaca and help him pick the spot and so forth so that he could overlook Mirror and Shadow Lake, which at that time he could. And Mr. Guernsey was nationally known for his work, so that was a pretty big deal. I'm sure he wasn't cheap compared to any of the other architects. Other architects that usually would have come here would have been from like Oshkosh, Wisconsin Rapids, probably Appleton, places like that. A lot of homes are just kind of stick-built, what do you want? Tell me and we'll, as we go type thing too, That's a good question, thank you. This is a neat house, and the owners of that house are here too. This is a really cool old picture of the home. I love the little girl sitting on the porch. I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll get back to where this is. 409 East Lake Street, known as the Andrew C. Nelson Home. Queen Anne style. We're actually getting out of the Queen Anne's here pretty soon. 1888. This home really has not changed very much, a little bit on the front porch, but as far as a lot of the other features, they're all still very visible on the home that sits there today also, which is wonderful. One of the neat things on my home, which I've replicated, thanks actually, it's kind of a neat feature, and it was back then everything that you did that make your house more grand was obviously tried to be a show of wealth, whether it be inside or outside of the house. And the cresting you can see in on the top of the house, and then also the spandrels that come off of both of the peaks. Most of the time, those are made out of cast iron and in time would fall apart. Sometimes they actually used the metal during World War I, or they were made out of wood and rotted, of course, in time. And I've replicated those on our house today. Those are not the original on my house. Go to the next picture, that's one of the neat details you can still see. A lot of times they'd even be in pressed steel and other things like that, which I actually think that's probably what this house was, like a pressed stamped steel. Many times those didn't survive once the roof was replaced because they took them off, they got all bent and broke, and they're lost to history, unless luckily we have a picture like this. One of the nice things I like to point out about the Andrew C. Nelson home is that Krause's that are here tonight, they put an addition onto the north side of the home, and I actually say this in the brochure too, is that the addition that they put on the home, you can't see it obviously in this picture, is that the addition that they put on is what we would call a sensitive addition, where they're taking the architecture that's there and they're using that same feel or that same philosophy with the addition. So it may not be perfectly seamless, which sometimes you don't want because houses grow just like everything does. And they did a very nice job of doing that. I definitely say that in the brochure also. I think this picture was, I don't remember for sure if we got it marked, I think it's 1890s. But you can see the roofing once again would be a wood shingle, a cedar shake shingle most likely. This one is known as the Irving P. or I.P. Lord Home, Queen Anne style, built 1890. You hear me say 1890, 1888, 91 too. Lots of houses were being built at that time. I think everybody was busy. Waupaca was really, really booming. Kind of interesting feature that I like to pick out and I do in the guide is you don't see this roof line very often. And nowadays they call it a clipped gable, but the correct pronunciation or the correct term for it is a jerkin head. It sounds to me like my guess is that's German. Maybe I'm not sure, but I can get into the detail of a lot of these people. Mr. Lord, probably his biggest claim to fame was, and this home, I'm sorry, I don't know if I said, is on 803 South Main Street. So now we're on our kind of going down Main Street, actually toward South Park. He owned the basically supplied electricity to Waupaca in the early, I've got the dates here because it's kind of interesting. They offered electric service until 1920, but kind of one of the neat services that they provided is they had the trolley service that that worked through Waupaca, but then also went all the way out to the Grand Hotel, which is not there anymore, out by the Veterans Home, which was the major hotel on the chain of lakes back in the 1890s, I think it was built, wasn't it? That's nice that you're over there, Mike, thank you. Questions at all, guys?
Color.
Oh, that's a good one, thank you. Thank you, I'm glad you sat in front. A lot of the houses that are on in color, in my house obviously wasn't, but one of the fun things that I like about being on the Historic Commission is I like working with people on colors. And most people, if they buy a home like this, want it to look kind of as it did in the day. So I had the ability to work with these people on color choice. Usually I say, what's the base color, the body color that you want, and then help them with the trim color, the sash color, accent colors. Not so much just the color, but the biggest thing is usually the placement. A lot of people, when they have a Victorian home, sometimes will place colors in the wrong places. If you look at a home painted correctly, it just flows real nicely. These homes, this color would be fairly accurate for colors. A lot of people think everything was pretty stark, but these colors would have been common in the 1890s. Actually, the colors of my home are very common. That's where I actually picked that out of a color palette from the 1890s. So the white mystique that everybody thinks all houses were white back then, that didn't really start until probably the 20s, when people were painting their walls white and their ceilings white and their houses white for that clean feel. You know, before that, color was definitely in there. Not all colors were stable. Blue was not a stable color, just because of what they're using at the time to create the color and hold the color. And obviously paint has come eons too, but this house was painted historically accurate. Hutcheson House, two of the biggest things with Hutcheson House, it's at South Park, of course, is that one, it was moved to the spot in 1957, which thank God people had the foresight to save this home, because it's one of the oldest homes in Waupaca. It's one of the oldest stick-built homes in Waupaca. Before that, there would have been log homes or shanties, but this was one of the first homes, and one of the early first homes is also later on our guide too, that's on Granite Street. We're switching gears here. This house would be known as a Greek Revival style, which was probably by far the most popular style in the 1850s, 60s, and maybe even early 70s. This house would be a pretty subdued example of it, but you got to remember these are some of the earliest homes here. So one, they probably didn't have lots of money, and two, you didn't have that many people that even build houses. I mean, there was very few stores and anything. These people were the pioneers of Waupaca, basically. Actually, one of the neat things, and we talked about putting the pictures on here, it's really neat, but if we put every neat picture, then once again it would be the thickness of War and Peace. But that's one of the things that's lost to time. Other than who built it, paid to have it built, most of the time, if a person had the luxury of time, you probably could find way back in old paperwork, old tax rolls. Tax rolls I used a lot, especially when I wasn't sure about dates or needed to firm up dates on when something was built, because I want to make sure that this guide is, a high school kid could use it for paper and it's accurate. And we should be accurate, because then everybody bases everything off of that years later too. So you kind of need to do that. But sadly, lost to time, unless it was in the Waupaca Republican, which it was for quite a few homes that I went through. I noticed later on, talking about Caleb Shearer's home was coming along nicely on Lake Street. Blah 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 is doing a masterful job of building it, and actually I forgot the fellow's name that did build my house. I wish I could find the information. I had it somewhere and I can't find it again. It's in one of those drawers that we all have. This is an interesting home. We're kind of shifting gears to the teens, 20s, and sometimes even the 30s. This was a house I had to look up because it was kind of all over the place. These houses were built for a 20, 30-year span, so it was kind of hard to know exactly what time frame it came from. At 804 South Main Street, it's known as the Stanley Hocking Home. It's a Dutch colonial revival. The biggest feature of the Dutch colonial is the roof line, known as a gambrel, and that's on your sheet too. Neat homes. This home is known as the E.M. Gordon home, also has the original matching carriage house. We always try to say garage when it was a garage and carriage house when it was a carriage house, and then obviously later became a garage. This house was built in 1897. Here we would call this a late Queen Anne. The house has been altered a little bit just by the fact because of the siding would have been a little bit thinner clapboard back then, but other than that the home is very intact as far as all of its other features. But late Queen Anne, a lot of people could easily call this a four-square too, because it has a lot of four-square influence, and that's kind of where the Queen Anne style kind of by the time the early 1900s came along, it was evolving into almost that style, or many different styles. So, but technically it's a late Queen Anne style. I'm only on number 13. How are we doing? I gotta speed it up, don't I? Okay. 702 South Main Street. This is known as the Jenny Brown and Clarence Truesdell home. And the reason why I leave Brown on there is because the Brown family was very instrumental in Waupaca for many, many years. And interestingly, they actually lived next door to each other as you go down Main Street. And there's actually a Brown Street that separates two of the Brown homes. So also a late Queen Anne style home. This one's known as the E.E. Brown home. Also has the original carriage house. It's a Queen Anne style, built 1894. The neat thing about the old pictures that we put up is if there have been some changes to the home, which you expect in 100+ years, it's neat that you can see the original and see how maybe the changes have occurred over time, looking at the house physically today and then looking back at the picture. And luckily on our guide, the picture should be big enough where you can see the picture well enough.
Is this the brown, that's that brown point out of the chain too?
That I don't know. Do you know, Mike? Brown Point? Same brown? My guess is because I know they had homes on the chain.
Probably.
So probably.
It has an E on the end of the
Christie
name.
family did too. Yep.
And he built this in 1890?
This is 1894.
What street is this on?
I'm sorry, this is 614 South Main. The last two houses have been Main Street. Now we're heading down Main Street kind of towards the post office. Go ahead, sir.
The question is, all these houses built in like 1850 to 1890s, did they have a bathroom built in, or did that all come later?
Well, it depends on how, I guess, one, it depends on how much money the person had that built the home. A lot of homes, probably pre-1890s, 1880s, probably had, you used a chamber pot or maybe had an outhouse or something like that. When you get into the 1880s, Waupaca had some waterworks, but not really anything that was real reliable or went very far. Using my house as a good example for that question, built in 1891, he had actually a water tower in the backyard. And we could go into that one too, but the water tower actually survived for many years out in King, the actual tank. Anyway, they obviously had the water tower, and I think in 1907, city water became a little more prevalent and a little more available to the public. But before that, it was kind of either you pumped it, or you had a cistern, or that's a good question, because we could talk a lot about that. Just even the evolution of bathrooms and plumbing, electricity. That's another one. A lot of these homes weren't electrified until later on, also until 1890s. A lot of homes were becoming electrified. This home is known as the Evan Coolidge home at 612 South Main Street. You could call this a couple of different things. It could be known as a front gable because the gable faces front. That's a pretty easy one. But and it was built in 1888, which kind of surprised me. I thought it was an older home, and it kind of leans towards Greek Revival influence with the little pilasters in the corner that look like they have a top. Very simple version. I thought for sure I'd find this house to be in the 1860s. My guess is Mr. Coolidge liked this look, and that's why he built his house this way. This one is the P.J. Christopherson home, 604 South Main Street. Late Queen Anne style. You're seeing Queen Anne influence again, but much more subdued. You don't see all of the bric-a-brac and changes in windows and sizes and all of that, but still a very beautiful home. Home is pretty much unchanged, as it is today. This house was built in 1901, and that picture is actually 1911, if I recall. Another interesting thing in looking at some of these pictures, it looked like in the 19-teens or 20s, we had the ability to look at some of these pictures and pan out a little bit, and you can see when cement walkways started becoming more prevalent, and even in Waupaca. Before, everything was wood or it was dirt. So we could probably talk about that for an hour. A lot of people don't know this, that this building was actually built by P.J. Christopherson, who was a physician and his brother, the building to the right there, the brick building, which also still stands, but that actually was built in 1921 as the first built to be a hospital. It wasn't a house changed to a hospital. It was actually built for the purpose of being a hospital. And one of the interesting things, sadly, is that Mr. Christopherson actually died in his own hospital, either while doing surgery or having surgery.
What address?
109 West Lake Street. Next house is 426 South Main Street, known as the Bailey Home. American four-square style, built in 1910. Pretty much your quintessential four-square style. This is one of my favorites, 414 South Main Street, Adele and Hugo Lee Home. Lee was a popular name or common name in the 19th century here in Waupaca. They were related. There was multiple Lee families. This would be known as the shingle style. And I'm glad that the Lee home's here because we don't have many pure shingle style homes in Waupaca. You see these homes much more on the East Coast where you picture there should be an ocean or something right behind it or right in front of it. But a beautiful home has been changed very, very little, over the years. Built in 1891, which, as I said, is kind of a very common year for homes being built. This is a neat picture too. I think also out of the Centennial. 404 South Main Street, Mumbroo Penny Home. You'll notice, like the Shearer Christie house, obviously Shearer built it. Christie's lived there for many generations. Mr. Mumbroo was a gentleman that built the home in 1873, but did not live there for that many years. And then Mr. Penny bought the home, A.M. Penny, who was the potato guy. He was the biggest potato trader in the area. And one of the things, and I'll touch on it now, because we're probably not going to have time later, is that one of the things I didn't realize, I knew Waupaca was a huge potato trading center in the late 19th century, but I didn't realize it was the biggest potato trading center in the world. And there was actually a potato they called the Waupaca potato. Go ahead.
What was the address again?
The address of the home is 404 South Main Street. This is yeah, it's right. You just have to look out the window. Neat thing about this house, because there's very few of them, there's 2 or 3 others in town, but you don't usually see them either because of trees or the roof line's been changed over the years. But the Second Empire style is a style that had a very short reign in just the 1870s, so they're pretty rare, pretty unusual, especially compared to a Queen Anne or a four-square. So thank God it survived. The drawing is wonderful, but one of the things I like, and we're hoping to get in the brochure, is they had a fountain in the front. And we like the scale on this because the people would have to be about 2.5 feet tall to make the house look the grandest that it is. And the fountain was not that big either, but it was a beautiful fountain. That's a neat picture because, yeah, you look. That's a neat thing even of the drawings is that you can glean so much information from one old picture, one old drawing. You can see there's very little back there. You can see a windmill. What's that?
The base of the fountain is still there.
Yeah, the base of the fountain is still there. Unfortunately, nobody knows what happened to the fountain for sure. But we do have one neat picture of it that hopefully we can keep in the guide. 306 South Main Street, our post office that we still have today. Kind of a neat picture because they were still constructing it. This is a classic revival style, 306 South Main, if I didn't say it, and built in 1938. Neat picture of the cars, and you can still see the guys working on it. We know where this is. 321 South Main Street, Waupaca Free Public Library, which of course is what it was originally known as. English Tudor Revival style, built in 1913. And obviously has changed very little, which is wonderful.
Carnegie Library.
Carnegie Library. And actually, interesting about U.S. history is Mr. Carnegie, who was an extremely wealthy man in the early 1900s, donated lots of money to lots of communities to build libraries like these. Most of the libraries across the country built in this era, this time frame, was probably money donated by Carnegie, or Carnegie, depending on how who you talk to pronounce it. He donated probably millions of dollars, and back then that was a lot of money. neatest feature of this building that I think is something you don't see every day is the M-shaped roof line. And the roof line too, we talk about roof lines a lot because roof lines really denoted homes back then, where they're less common today. Kind of everybody has a similar roof line, same pitch even many times. Where this has an M-shaped, you can't see it as a picture, but if you looked at the building, literally, if you look at it from the side, the roof line has an M shape to it, which is, in our guide, we have roof styles that are in there too, so that you can look at the roof styles and go, oh, okay, that's what that's called. Go ahead.
Speaking of Andrew Carnegie, he also built himself a beautiful mansion on Fifth Avenue in New York City between, I think it's 90th and 91st Street, which is still there and is now owned by the Smithsonian Institute. It was private for a while, but you can go in there and it's a big design center now. They have lots of exhibits and things and a beautiful backyard, and it's a beautiful spot to go.
Yeah, I bet. This one's obviously a beautiful picture too. This has to be just when they're finishing up because there's still dirt in front of it, and it doesn't even look like they got the steps finished or the handrails on. It's St. Mark's Episcopal Church, 415 South Main Street, known as a Gothic Revival, built 1905. And I'll probably not try to talk about some of the interesting features because we've got to keep cooking here. This is 523 South Main Street, known as the A.G. Nelson Home, which sometimes got confused with A.C. Nelson Home, which was a home we looked at earlier. This would be a late Queen Anne style. Still has some pretty heavy Queen Anne style features with the tower, but much more subdued than earlier styles. Was built in 1901.
I've seen a lot of places that have the towers. Was there a function to the tower, or was it anybody used it for anything?
No, just mostly a look. Tower in this, I think a study was on the first floor as part of a bedroom on the second floor, and third floor is probably just for the view, just like it would be today. In my home, the tower, the first story of the tower is part of the foyer. On the second story, it's my oldest son Sam's bedroom, and on the third floor, it's a beautiful view of Mirror and Shadow Lake in the wintertime. This is known as the 512 South Jefferson, the A.R. Lee home. No, I'm sorry. Did I skip here?
This is the corner of Lake and...
Yes, I skipped. So I'm trying to rush too much. I got to settle down here. So even I look at, no, I should know that. This is 528 South Jefferson Street, and I do have to tell this one. It's known as the P.A. Chesley home, built in 1870. Some parts of the home have been remodeled. It was remodeled some in 1903 to probably update a little bit, maybe even create a little more space. The porches are updated in 1903. Still very much an Italianate style in its appearance. Italianate is best known by the brackets and the windows. But kind of one of the neatest features of the home is over the years it's actually had two different addresses. It's waffled between 528 South Jefferson Street and 115 East Lake Street. And the correct one is actually Jefferson Street. This one's known as the N.P. Peterson Home, 520 South Jefferson Street, Queen Anne style, 1891. You'll see this home style a lot, not only in Waupaca, but all over the country. Once again, very common cross gable style home. Neat feature about this home is the exterior trim, hood molding on the doors and windows is found at least on 3 different homes in Waupaca. So I'm assuming it was a traditional element that the builder liked, I'm not sure. Or was easily bought maybe right at the local lumber yard. Now I'm to Jack's home. I'm glad this. 512 South Jefferson Street, the A.R. Lee home, a front gable style, and some Italianate influence. You don't see some of the home in this picture, but this picture, when we found it, it's just, man, what a beautiful picture, and so neat for the home. It's timeless. This is the neat picture where the house that you see in the background is no longer exists. There's another house sitting there, which is also an old home by today's standards. This house was built in 1880. Next house is 510 South Jefferson that stands where the house in the background used to stand, known as the M.P. Godfrey home, and also has the original matching garage. This is a Georgian revival style built in 1926. You'll hear me start saying when we start getting into the teens, 20s, and 30s revival, because many styles were kind of revivals of an era, and they would just kind of pick and choose what parts they liked, and almost everything was a revival style in the teens, 20s, and 30s. This one's known as the John Peterson Home. It's at 322 South Jefferson Street, known as a neoclassic revival style, and this is kind of the quintessential poster child for that, because the front porch is what makes this probably the best example of a neoclassic style, with that porch spanning 2 to 3 stories. And that home still exists today too. That picture is probably from the very early 1900s. This is 411 South Jefferson Street, known as the William Dressen Home. Also has the original garage. This would be a prairie school style home, similar to a four-square style. It was built in 1924. Has a lot of the four-square elements, but kind of digresses from that with the roof line, especially in the entryway, and then also has buttresses on the corners of the home. And then also the style is much more simple, which prairie styles were supposed to be kind of without no frou-frou, essentially. This one is obviously the former St. Mary Magdalene Catholic Church, built in 1932, 223 South Division Street. It's a Gothic revival, but kind of a 1930s interpretation of Gothic revival, of the Art Deco eras amongst us. And once again, as I said, revival series, they kind of picked and choose what they liked. Obviously, this building still exists today, and hopefully in the near future, we can see a restoration done to that beautiful building as well. This is a neat picture from the 1930s. This one's known as the Joel Jockwith Home, 315 South Division Street. Could call it a Queen Anne style bungalow. A bungalow is kind of a term you use for anything that's smaller, quaint. This was built in 1898, but interesting, still has a lot of elements to the Queen Anne style, just in a truncated form. This is known as the Presbyterian/Catholic Church at 321 South Division Street. It's a Greek revival style home built in 1865. So one of our earlier structures still standing. Now is today an apartment complex, but still has most of its exterior style visible, still surviving. This is known as the Milata Luke's Home. Most homes always seem to be named after the gentleman that built it. Sometimes you'll see the wife's name also when I'm doing the historic research, but this one's known as Milata Luke, so I'm assuming that she herself built this home. I don't know a lot about the gal. This is at 325 South Division Street, American four-square style, with prairie school influence also. So you'll get your merging of styles also in this era. This house was built in 1921. Later was the Bammel Funeral Home for many years. Many of you guys that grew up or knew Waupaca in earlier years, it served that function, and now is a private home once again. This is the 400 South Division Street T.M. Payne Home, Greek Revival style, built in 1870. Kind of late in the Greek Revival style, so you don't see a lot of the elements are a little more subdued. This is 408 South Division Street, bungalow style, built in 1918, was originally the rectory for the church that stands next to, which is now apartment building. This house is 504 South State Street, known as the E.B. Jeffers Home, an Italianate style, which you don't hear me say a lot. This home is a real good example of that style, built in 1873. This is a neat picture too from the 1920s of the Chris Mortensen home at 416 South State Street. Interesting style because you don't see this style in Wisconsin at all. But in the teens, 20s, and 30s, people were kind of really reaching out there for something totally different. You'd see this be much more common out west, down south, something like that. known as a Spanish colonial style, built in 1921. This one's 402 South State Street, known as the E.B. Fisher Home, a late Queen Anne style, built in 1905. I'm doing better for my time, actually? I'm cooking now? Okay, 320. This one's an interesting style again, 324 South State Street, known as the Charles Pier Home. It's a colonial revival style, built in 1917. This home, going back to Mr. Shearer that built my home, he built this home in 1885 and my house in 1991, so 6 years. Yeah, 1891, I'm sorry. This is at 315 South State Street, known as the C.J. Shearer Home, and is also Queen Anne style. The fence, the neat thing about this illustration is the beautiful fence that must have been there at one time. This is 407 South State Street, known as the Henry Indestead Home, an American foursquare style, but done in brick. This is also American foursquare style. I don't know if I said it, 1921 for the home we just looked at, and this one's 1926. And these homes are right next door, so once again, a lot of building going on State Street. This is known as the Ira Williamson Home, 511 South State Street, American foursquare style. Probably the only thing that's kind of interesting about this home, different than other foursquare styles, is that it doesn't have dormers. And that was actually, we just leave them. This home doesn't have dormers up on the roof line where most foursquare styles did. This is the 513 South State Street, known as the Gus Lewis Home, Queen Anne style, 1892. Earlier when I was talking about the trim or the hood moldings around the window, this house is the same as that house, just the mirror image or the reciprocal of it. This house is 521 South State Street, known as the Carl Nelson Home. This home is you're kind of basically just stating how it was built, and it's known as a front gable style home because that gable once again comes out towards the front of the home. Early style, kind of a transition once again from Queen Anne, right on the corner of Lake Street and State Street. This home is over on Royalton Street, 726, known as the Hans Knutson Home, who was also a builder in the area, did a lot with brick especially. Actually probably built some of the homes that we have looked at that maybe the builder wasn't ever recognized, but was a very prolific builder in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This would be known as an arts and crafts style, but the only arts and crafts style home that's a good example, built in 1920, and pretty much what makes it mostly arts and crafts style is the front porch. Otherwise, some people could actually call it a Queen Anne, too. That would be the default. This home was one of the earlier homes of Waupaca, too, known as 401 Waupaca Street. Walter and Weston Levisay home, the Italianate style, built in 1870. This home is the Christian Larson home at 413 Waupaca Street, known as a Queen Anne style, once again built in 1894. Interestingly, the Levisay brothers, because I talked about Walter and Weston on the house prior, they owned this whole block at one time. I would assume they bought it to parcel off later. His brother supposedly had a home here at one time too, and maybe it was tore down for this home to be built. I'm not sure. This is the Danish Evangelical Lutheran Church, 204 Maple Street, Gothic Revival style, also built in 1905. And that's just right down the road just across the street from the house we just looked at. Railroad Depot, I think this is a 1908 picture, if I recall. Is it in there? No. But this railroad, we've had multiple depots over the years. Some have been lost to fire. This building, which we still have to this day, was built in 1907. Beautiful example, very cool picture.
Signed by Frost and Granger. Frost and Granger architects from Chicago.
Nice.
What would you call that design style?
Let's see, what do I have listed? Because I remember I had to look at this one for quite a while. Classical Revival, yep.
It's got the Spanish
Yep. It's a beautiful building. Classical revival, you don't see, that one we don't say a whole lot other than with 2 homes and the depot. This is 307 West Fulton Street, known as the William Dorfler home, craftsman style. These homes are usually pretty easy to pick out. Built in 1910, which was actually very early for craftsman style home. Very simple. This is even a better example of the craftsman style, known as the W.F. Wildfang home at 403 West Fulton Street. This one was built in 1922 and was actually just restored some here this last year. This picture's a little bit older, but has all the, it is the poster child of what a craftsman house would have looked like. You know, Sears question that's a good question. A lot of these homes we don't know if they're Sears home. I've heard there's maybe a couple of homes in Waupaca that are Sears homes, but I don't know that for sure. Usually you have to investigate real heavy, get up in the attic where you can see where they would have numbered rafters and so forth like that. I don't know. I can't point to these homes and say it could have originally been a Sears home. I don't know if you know anything different, Mike. Go ahead.
Why are the basements out of the ground?
That was just a look. Yeah, many times it was just a look. Now, that being said, in places in Waupaca where you have the granite shelf, sometimes you couldn't dig very deep, especially when you get on the north side of town. But the elevated, I think it was just more of a stop feature, you know, for these homes.
Most have really deep basements too.
Yeah, well, a lot of homes in Waupaca have some pretty deep. It's interesting when you have people come from other places of the country, and it's weird how people ask you to go down in your basement. But it's amazing how deep our basements are in Wisconsin compared to Iowa and even Illinois and places like that. And maybe some of that is for cooler temperatures, keeping food and so forth. My home is a good example of. When it was hot in the summertime, they finished actually the basement off as much as a basement would be finished in the 1890s, because where would you go when it's 90 degrees and horrible humid? You go in the basement, And when they move up once it cooled off a little bit. Good question. Did I give the style on that one? I did, or not the style, but the Wildfang home? Okay, no, it didn't. I'll say it real quick then for 403 West Fulton Street, W.F. Wildfang home, 1922. This home is the Matt Jensen home. We're at 501 West Fulton Street, so we're kind of heading west on Fulton Street. Queen Anne style with stick style influence. It's something you don't hear me say much either. Stick style was kind of an added feature to most Queen Anne styles. You could have a stick style only home, but you don't see them very often. If you do, they're usually on the East Coast. Very short span of time, kind of like the Second Empire. The stick style kind of had that, if you look it up, Google it, I guess, if you will, they always talk about kind of a skeletal look where you can see, if you could peel back the clapboards and so forth, you've got like this skeletal, which basically is the trim. And it's a little more subdued in this style, the stick style is, but in some stick homes, the boards and the belt lines that create the corner boards and so forth are real accentuated.
Scott?
Built in 1890, sorry.
The front window that's the stained glass, is there a particular name for that?
Yeah, in the guide I call it a Queen Anne style window. It's one of those things when you start, sadly some of the features on some of these homes, and I thank God for Google, because if I would have been using books for all this, I'd had stacks around me all the time. But it seems to be that the most common phrase used for that style of window is a Queen Anne style window. And you always see them on Queen Anne homes usually too, so that kind of fits. 509 West Fulton Street, known as the Henry and Elizabeth DeLong home. This is a classical revival style home, built in 1903. And this picture is a 1906 picture. This
Scott?
that home changed very little
Scott?
too. Yeah.
Is the exterior material stone or concrete block?
Good question. I was going to not touch on that but now that you did, then I can blame you. But one of the neat things in Waupaca is the gentleman that built this home, the next one we're going to see, and the next one we're going to see, he built all three of those homes for family members. He built this home for his in-laws in 1903, and at the late 1890s, turn of the century, they were, people trying to build homes quicker and trying not to use fieldstone foundations. So somebody had come up with a mold that you could actually mold concrete block, or what we call rusticated block today, to give it that look. So they would have a whole bunch of these molds, just keep making them, and then build your house. Mr. Gemeiner, that had the brickyard, was producing these as well as Waupaca brick as we know it. So when he built this home for his in-laws, obviously he was also kind of touting his business as well too. And these homes are built, yeah, they'll last forever, you know. But that's a good question. Typically rusticated block you don't see used throughout the home. It's usually foundation. But we have a church, you know, I was going to actually point that out earlier, that church just down the street is rusticated concrete block too. And it lasted for, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, and then they started coming out with the more common concrete block that you still see to this day.
Were some of the Sears homes?
This home, I know this one wasn't, because expounding out on the story again, the people that this home was built for, their son-in-law actually designed this home. He sold this blueprint on in the magazines that we were talking about earlier too, and he actually called this house the Waupaca. So you could be looking through a national trading magazine and go, oh, the Waupaca, that's kind of a neat home. And based very much on a four-square style again, but with a lot of classic revival influence. And I touch on the DeLong home and the Gemeiner story real heavily in the guide too, because it's very interesting. They owned a lot of that whole block at one time.
We have the house next door to us in Wild Rose. Looks very much like this, except the one next to us is much simpler. But they said that those blocks were made on site.
Oh, yeah, and they were. Yeah, exactly. There's a home like this, I guess, very similar in Neenah, Wisconsin, too. This home is kind of an interesting example. This is actually where Mr. Gemeiner lived, built a home in, I'll get back to my description here. We got the DeLong home at 1903. This is 517 West Fulton Street, Conrad and Carrie Gemeiner home, late Queen Anne style, built 1898. This home unfortunately had a fire in, year was it? 1943, where literally the third floor, most of the second floor was destroyed. So they never rebuilt it back. I was told, and there's supposedly, hopefully a picture we can find in time, but we couldn't. Heirs to this family have the picture somewhere, and they're still trying to find it, but we just couldn't find it in time for the guide. But she has a picture of the home in its full splendor, pre-fire. But this is the home that Mr. Gemeiner built, and then a few years later built, like I said, his in-laws' home, and then the house next door, he built this for his son and daughter-in-law. This house would be known as the Archibald Gemeiner home, 519 West Fulton Street, kind of a mixture of Tudor and English cottage styles, built in 1926.
Carport's recently in front. The carport on the front is a recent addition.
Yep, and I point that out actually in the guide too. It's a porte-cochere. They did a very nice job once again of adding on to the home, but not taking away from it, you know, holding the style. And I say that also in the brochure too, because they really did. This home is known as the Tom Whittington home, 218 Granite Street. This one you might not recognize because it's way up on Granite Hill there. So you have to kind of look up to see it. It overlooks the town. Actually, it's a beautiful view up there. This would be a Queen Anne style, built in 1895. This is kind of a mystery house. There's not a lot of information on this home other than pretty much what I tell you in the guide, which is about a paragraph is all. This is home next. It's a home now, but it was originally the Waupaca County Jail, built in 1867 in what would have been known as the Italianate style. It's 310 Granite Street. We can't see it in this picture, but on the back side of this picture would be the portion of the jail where I guess the prisoners would have been, and then your jailer / sheriff would have lived in the home with their family, and until the new jail was built later on. This I think this served until 1895 as a jail. Another good example of the American four-square style, but all brick, which is kind of neat. I see a lot of brick in the teens, 20s. This is known as the C.J. Miller home, built 1920 at 330 Granite Street. We're on Granite Street now. This one is 401 Granite Street, known as the C.W. Andrews home, and also has the original matching garage, which I couldn't get in the picture. Mr. Andrews actually worked with Dr. Salen's dad to form Mirror Lake Hospital that we talked to, which maybe seems like 6 or 7 hours to you guys, but this would have been definitely a home built by a guy who's kind of a mover and a shaker too. Very atypical home for Wisconsin. Much more common to see this out west or in Florida. You know,
He lived in the Southwest for a while, and he moved back here.
Yep.
Because he liked that design. He built that house.
Yeah, he actually
I used to know his son real well.
He was oh, did you? Okay. I guess he was somehow involved in the movie industry at one time too. So, but very neat home, very unusual.
People that lived there were later, I know.
I'm not sure. You know, I knew that too, and that's what's kind of a weird parallel. And I don't know if I touched on this. Is known as a Spanish colonial revival style. 1921 it was built in. This is one of the older homes in Waupaca once again, 405 Granite Street, known as the Winfield Scott home. It's a Greek revival style built in 1855. The Scotts were a very prominent family in Waupaca in the 1850s up till the turn of the century. This whole addition that we're talking about, where many of these homes are on the tax rolls, is known as the Scott addition. So that definitely shows how early they are into Waupaca history. Another beautiful Queen Anne style home built in 1899, known as the P.M. Olfson home, 415 Granite Street. Beautiful example of Queen Anne style. A lot of the different Queen Anne features still intact. This is another one we could talk about for a long time. We're almost done, and if there's questions, we can definitely talk about them. Last house, East 3192 Apple Tree Lane, known as the Charles Churchill home. Obviously, you got a street named after him. Queen Anne style. This would be an early Queen Anne style, 1880. And we actually kind of warred with ourselves a little bit. This is, if you guys recognize where this home is, out on Apple Tree Lane. We had at least 4 or 5 pictures that we'd gotten that we kind of weren't sure which one to use, but this is kind of the neatest one. It just has that feel to it. But you can see the cresting on the roof line once again. And one of the things I point out that you don't see that's original to this house and still is there is the portico Shearer, which is on the right there. This is the only home that I know of in Waupaca that had one originally. Believe it or not, that actually concludes. The hardest thing to do was to make a guide that covered all the styles well and tried to cover as many homes as we possibly could. And once again, you can only cover so many, otherwise it's not a booklet anymore, it's not a guide anymore. Well, as soon as it's done, which I'm hoping the next couple of weeks, it should be available downtown at most of the retail stores. Go ahead, Ashley.
Here in the chamber,
Oh,
we're hoping,
yeah.
Any of your historic sites.
Yep.
How much are these guys?
They'll be $2. So really economical. Us being part of the Historic Commission, I can definitely say that the city helps pay for those things. So that's your tax dollars at work. Excuse me? 64 homes. But then I also go into a lot of the early history of Waupaca, try to talk some about architects. Obviously, all the architectural stuff that you guys are reading is in there, and then also a glossary of terms. So a lot of the terms that I use in the guide, you can go, what the heck does that mean? You can go to the back. And it's a walking tour, but it'd be a lot of walking. So we didn't really call it a walking tour, it's more of a guide, because some of these homes are a pretty good distance. But they all will be marked on a map, and they'll all have the addresses, so you can either use your phone to find them if you're driving, otherwise you'll have a map in the guide too. Go ahead.
What is the source of the illustration in the second slide that you showed, the Hoffman House?
Your house, you mean?
Because I don't have it.
That is here. Well, it's here, but it also is in that Illustrated Waupaca 1888. Yep. Yep. And you know, the funny thing with that story is I've looked at these houses so many times over the last couple of years that I've been working on this. It's amazing how much time you can put into this and get absorbed into it. But you have to kind of stay focused. Just give the particulars. If the particulars, keep it a good size that goes in your pocket. And I was brushing through that house not 2 months ago. Otherwise, I was just using the current picture. I'm like, man, why do I know that house? Why do I know that house? And I pulled out my laptop and I went through the pictures. Like, that's why I know that house, you know. But it changed just enough with the additions to the east there that it's not quite the same. But obviously, those additions were extremely early. They could have been done only a couple years after the home was built, would be my guess, because it's still a stone foundation. And maybe they just outgrew the home or thought, yeah, we'll expand a little.
Side porch. Yeah.
Yep, side porch, and the little mini tower dormer wasn't there, which I think is kind of a cool feature that they added later on too. Spiced it up a little bit.
So that's in the library?
Yep. Oh, well, it's in the library and it's here too. Yep.
Scott, did you have to get permission from the current homeowners to be included in the guide?
No, you don't, because people always ask that too, because people are always taking pictures of a lot of homes. Obviously, my home is one of them. And a lot of people actually walk up to the door, which is very kind of them, and say, can I take a picture of your home? It's like, absolutely you can, but anything that is, you know, out where we can look at it is known as public domain. So you can take pictures of, you know, people's houses all day long. That being said, if you're doing artwork that you're selling or something like that, then I think you get into more of a gray zone. But otherwise, yeah, no, we don't have to get people's permission to use their home. Hopefully, they would like all the information we put together on these homes. And a lot of stuff was things that I ran into that I didn't know, and I think a lot of us in this room didn't know that I put in the guide. Real, just interesting stories, you know. Go ahead, my dear.
I'm not from Waupaca, so I'm probably the only one who doesn't know this. The Preservation Commission, or whatever it's called.
The Historic Preservation
Can you say
Commission.
just a little bit
Yeah,
about
absolutely,
what
and I was going to do that in the
how
beginning.
you have-
Yeah, absolutely. The Historic Preservation, any town that has a Historic Preservation Commission, which ours started in 1996, and actually I have that in the guide too, so that's a good question. Anytime you start getting homes on the National Register, you need kind of a local, I don't even want to use police because that's way too harsh of a term, but you need somebody at the local level helping people if they want to put an addition on is probably the best example, or if they want to restore something, or if they want to paint the house or the correct colors, those sorts of things. We're just, it's not none of us are paid to be on it. We do it because we love this kind of stuff. Ashley's also on it too, as she said. But our main purpose is to help people when they're trying to get some of the credits that are available on historic homes, and I wish I could have talked about that too, is we have 2 wonderful historic districts in Waupaca that you can get monies back on your taxes, on your property taxes, because you're maintaining this historic property. That's a good question. Ours has been here since 1996. I think I've been sharing it since 1998, 1999, something like that. But when they started looking at putting more properties on the National Register, that's when things kind of come into place at the federal level to have somebody locally.
So do you have control?
No, and I'm glad you bring that up, because a lot of people, when we created these historic districts back in the 1990s, early 2000s, which are signs, I don't know if you guys ever noticed the street signs kind of designate the historic districts. A lot of people were very concerned that we were going to tell them what they have to do with their house and what they can't do with their house. And none of that is really true. That's kind of one of those lures that just gains ground. You're the taxpayer. You can do anything you want with your home. That being said, if you want to do what we would call the right things by the home, you know, restoring, or even if you add on to them, which you can do also, as long as you respect the character and the architecture of the home, that's fine. You don't get tax credit money towards an addition. What the federal tax credits are best used for, and I've used them actually twice on the restoration of our home, is I guess you'd say the guts, the mechanicals of the home, the electric, the plumbing, roofing, brickwork, structural repair, structural replacement or restoration, those sorts of things. They're not going to give you money towards because you want a pink toilet or you know, those sorts of things. The main structure is what they're interested in. And the federal government's mostly interested in the public appearance, what you see, you know, from the street side. Windows is another biggie that they will help with costs on those sorts of things too. Paint is a big one, if it's painted accurately. Now, it doesn't have to be, you know, colors that the state likes or we like at the local level, but if it's done in a at least reminiscent of the era, that also is, there's tax credits available for that too. And you would do that when you have your taxes prepared and you work at the state level with the Madison, people in Madison, and it comes to you as a tax credit check to help offset the costs you paid, obviously, to restore the home or the building. It is also for buildings downtown, and we hope to do a downtown guide sometime in the future. I think we're going to take a little break for a while, but income-producing buildings, the rules are a little bit different as far as how things are set up there too, but the same thing. The whole aim is to keep those buildings standing, keep them looking architecturally appropriate to what they were when they were built, but also help somebody, you know, keep their business or stay living there too. Heating and cooling is, obviously they didn't have air conditioning in the 1890s when my home was built. That's one of the things we put in, but if you do it in a subdued manner, you know, the state definitely understands that we have to live in the now too. So when I did my heating and air conditioning, which is already outdated, but that is also tax credit money that you can get, up to 20%. So it's worth doing the legwork and the paperwork. And that's some of the things that I help people with too. So if some of you guys are in local historic districts, whether it be Main Street or Lake Street, and you are planning a project, you know, please call either City Hall or you can call me directly, and I can help you with the resources or the correct people to talk to, so you can essentially save some money in the long run. 20% of the bills, that's significant. So, go ahead.
How many houses on the Federal Historic Register?
Throughout the country?
Well, you know, here.
Well, good question too. In the state of Wisconsin, if you're on the state register, you're also on the federal register, because the guidelines that Wisconsin uses is pretty much the federal guidelines. So a lot of times when you're looking at paperwork, especially if you have them send paperwork to you or you download them, a lot of times it'll say federal on it, because we're strict is definitely not the right term, the correct guidelines. Once again, some states it's only at the state level too. And locally, we also have local homes that we've picked out over the years too, and you'll see that on some of these homes with the Waupaca, city of Waupaca, with plaques too that we feel are some of the best emulators of the style, mostly the architecture of the home.
But I know your house is on the federal.
Ours would be local, state, and federal. Well, when you look at there's 79 contributing homes to the Lake Street district, and there's, I can't remember, I was contributing to downtown.
They're on the federal?
That's also federal too,
okay.
Yeah. So you're talking over 100 homes there already, plus some of the homes that you saw tonight are outside of those historic districts. So at the state and federal level, we have well over 100 homes that these people can take advantage of these tax credits.
What about outside of Waupaca Lake?
And that's always a toughie. I get people from outside of the community that ask if I know a lot of information, and yeah, I can sound like I know everything about every home. Yeah, I've done so much research and learned so much about them myself, and my saving grace has been other booklets that have been done of Waupaca, either very old ones or newer ones, and kind of compiling all the information. But one of the toughest things to do when you don't know anything about a home, one of the earlier homes, the Dutch Colonial, the blue one that we talked about, nobody really knew what year that home was built. And realtors a lot of times, and I'm not knocking realtors, but a lot of times they'll have kind of a guesstimation date on it, and you don't want to do a guide with guesstimation, years. So I use the tax rolls on many homes, and you literally dig out all of these books, which are huge, they're beautiful books, all handwritten and just beautiful penmanship. We could talk about those even they're gorgeous, but they're wonderful to use. With that home, I think I picked 1915, just going, okay, I'm kind of in the middle of the style there for that home. And and the hard thing is too, is you just don't look up the address. You have to do it by the, I'm going to not use the right terminology here, but so many rods from, the survey, thank you. you have to use the survey. So luckily, Rhonda, that works at the city, she could help me turn an address into the survey so that you can start looking it up. And you have to look up by the Scott edition. If I knew it was in the Scott edition, I'd start with there because the Scott edition was all together, or the Hibbert edition, and so forth and so on. And I just find that plat, and I look at them, they're only paying $400 a year on taxes, probably but nothing's there. So then I'll go back a little bit, and if I keep saying the same number, I'm like, okay, nothing was built there. And you'll see the names change on who owned the land. It's interesting how many common names. E.E. Brown owned, or not E.E. Brown, E.L. Brown owned so much land around here, it's amazing. The church that's up here, that escapes me now, he had donated the land for that church just up the road here. But a lot of those, A.G. Nelson owned a ton of land. He had and I also listened to a lot of things that these people did for a business. Obviously, if I said all that tonight, it would be much later. But I finally ran into where you can see an uptick in the taxes. And when you see that uptick of them paying taxes, then you know a home was built there. And interestingly, back then you'd actually see notations up along the spine and so forth saying so-and-so built a X amount square footage home, and you know, interesting things that you would never see today. And then I'll go follow it another year or two to make sure that it's stable. But you could, on your home as a good example, I didn't take the time to do it, but you could find out when that addition was put on your home, because you would see the uptick in taxes. You know, as they say, death and taxes, those are, and they'll never miss that one. So a lot of the additions over the homes, to homes over the years, you definitely, the problem is with the tax rolls, those books are so fragile. So usually it's something that I'll try to help somebody with to find, and you know, we've all only got so much time. And this is a good example. I did 4 homes that day, and it took me about 5.5 hours. So it's a slow, arduous process. Getting back to you, that's when I turn into a run-on sentence. When you get outside into the county, it's very difficult because they don't always have real good tax rolls. But if you can find tax rolls at the township level, that's your key, is to pick a year roughly that you think it was built and start going backwards and forwards until you find a change, and then you know when it was built, or at least something was built.
I had something stamped in brick on there that says 1891.
Well, and that's probable, but could that have been that addition, you know, to maybe there was that they put that basement on there too, so it's hard to say. But that's your starting point. I'd go back to 1892, 3 and see what the taxes were, and then go back to 93, and if it upticks quite a bit, you got it.
Can that be registered is what I really
Yes, yeah, and you can do that. You know, at the local level, we worked real hard, or at the city level, we worked very hard to do that, and we helped a lot of people spend money, obviously, to get this done for homes. When you get out in the country or outside of the city of Waupaca, you can still do it, but you can do it one of 2 ways. There's actually people in our country that do this for a living, that do all this legwork. And I actually talk about a gal named Carol Cartwright who did a lot of historic research on Waupaca in the 1990s, paid for by the Historic Commission, your tax dollars once again at work, to help us, because it would take forever, you know, for working people to, I mean, she literally, that's what she lived, eat, and breathed Waupaca for like a year, solid. That would probably be your best approach there. But yes, if you find information enough that satisfies the state, you can fill out all the information that you know to the best of your ability. You can download all that. They'll take a look at that and the pictures of your home, which is the biggest deal. If a lot of your home is very intact and you've got a comparison picture of early days to now, it's pretty much a shoe-in for these credits. This is all sent in either by email or by mail. They have a guideline that you send X amount of pictures that they want, usually interior, exterior, descriptions and so forth and so on, which is all the things I filled out on a lot of these houses years ago, which takes a long time too. But then you send that to Madison, they'll take a look at it and they'll either call or send you a letter back saying, we don't think it meets our criteria, or congratulations, you'll now be able to enjoy tax credits that are available at the state and federal level.
Scott, is there a cost for doing that?
Typically, I don't think there's still any cost, because that's also our tax dollars at work. Now, if you pay somebody to do that work for you, then of course there's a cost because that's privately done. But even that isn't too bad because those people are so skilled at doing what they're doing that they'll dive right into the library or the historic society or the tax rolls and find the information. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.